Let's start with the first talk this afternoon, which will be Other Minds, Empathy, and Interstellar Communication. And the speaker is Tomislav Janovic. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy and the Department for Communication Science Center for Croatian Studies at the University of Zagreb in Croatia. His interests range from philosophy of mind and philosophy of science to ethics and communication. He's worked for the Croatian Ministry of Science and Technology's Division of Research Projects at the Institute for Anthropology in Zagreb as a junior research fellow, and at the University of Zadar, Croatia, as a senior lecturer in philosophy. He is the author or co-author of scientific articles in peer-reviewed journals and books, and he is currently working on a project on evolutionary naturalism and the problem of moral knowledge. Please welcome our speaker for the first talk this afternoon.
Thank you. Everything okay? Okay. Of course, I'd like to thank Doug for inviting me here. It was a very exhausting and a very long journey from Zagreb to here, to the Pacific coast, but it paid off already for me, even before this talk. Whatever happens now, it's not important anymore. I'm probably gonna reinvent the wheel one more time more than some of my predecessors here. You will probably notice some similarities, or many similarities, in ideas between my talk and, for instance, David's or Kim's. So this is the title of my talk, and now to the most general assumptions or constraints in thinking about extraterrestrial intelligence and sending an interstellar message. So this is pretty obvious. We need to think about some technological constraints at the outset, meaning that our ET has to have some potential for receiving and emitting of an interstellar message. Secondly, from that follows some psychological and sociological constraints, which I will talk about today, and of course some communication constraints concerning questions like what kind of message should we send, what kind of signal, what code, what content, if any, and what context should we presuppose that is common between us and our potential unknown receiver of our message. So technological constraints are pretty obvious. I think everybody's here aware of that. Something like high technology is assumed, enabling communication across interstellar distances. Perhaps for this, I don't know, I'm not sure. I think something like a civilization of type 1 is needed on Kardashev scale. And some kind of stable social environment. This is actually more a sociological assumption than a technological one. But it is obvious that this civilization has to get out of its technological adolescence, as Seth has pointed out, in order to communicate with us. And now we come to these so-called psychological assumptions, which are an interesting starting point for me, because it is actually an instance of a very old philosophical problem called the problem of other minds. There are two versions of this problem, an objective and a subjective version. Objective version of this problem pertains to the questions like what are other minds are like, what functional properties do they instantiate, what can they do, how are these properties related to behaviors of organisms that have these minds, what are they made of, can they be realized in a different kind of stuff? This is a very interesting question and a subject of very heated debates in philosophy of mind and philosophy of artificial intelligence, for instance, and so on and so on. Unlike these questions, there is also a subjective perspective to the problem, basically boiling down to the question, what is it like to be another mind? For instance, a bat, or an alien in our case. Bat, of course, is an example taken up by Thomas Nagel in his famous article, What is it like to be a bat? So, how should we approach this subjective problem of other minds in case of extraterrestrial intelligence? Well, the answer is probably that in the same way as we approach the same problem in cases of familiar creatures, that is by use of a method that we can call compare and generalize method. And here is a quote from Tooby and Kosmides' article, The Psychological Foundations of Culture from 1992, showing what this method consists in. What about our potential comparisons? Who are we to compare ET with? This is also pretty obvious. Animal minds, human infant minds, human different minds, artificial minds, very important, and fictional minds, also very important. Some of the approaches to the ET problem are inspired by fictional minds and science fiction literature. These are the disciplines that we can profit from. I think almost all of these disciplines, except perhaps for xenoscience and science fiction, are represented here in this meeting. What about the subjective problem of other minds? Well, it might prove insolvable. Why? Because we have a very specific physical and mental constitution. We are constrained in thinking about other minds in the sense that we put ourselves in other creatures' shoes or skin, and it might prove impossible to do this in any kind of reasonable way, in a way that it would justify the knowledge of other minds. In other words, we might never be able to answer what is it like questions for truly different kinds of minds. Many philosophers of mind have pointed this out, in specific, already mentioned Thomas Nagel in his famous article. So this is a kind of skepticism towards a subjective problem of other minds. How does this relate to our project? Honestly, I don't know, but I think it relates somehow. It is important for us to know what we can know and what we cannot know about other minds. And I think that this kind of warning is important in thinking about constructing an interstellar message and achieving a contact with such a being. Well, what should we do at the beginning? I think that we should give a neutral as possible description of this interstellar mind that we are thinking about. And this is my proposal of this kind of neutral or instrumentalist approach. We should think of a being as an intentional system in the sense that I will not explain now because I don't have time, taken from Dennett. This intentional system has a degree of phenotypic plasticity comparable to our own. This is what we should assume if we want to achieve contact. So what does this actually mean? It means that it is a creature endowed with some set of psychological mental properties. Which properties? Well, first of all, representational properties, which enable a creature to represent aspects of its environment like percepts, concepts, beliefs, and so on, and use these tools to perform cognitive tasks. this is pretty obvious things that we have talked about a lot in these 2 days. Of course, we typically think of ET as possessing some kind of practical intelligence. That is, it is a creature that puts these mental structures like percepts, beliefs, and motivational states to a practical use. So we can think of alien minds as rational agents. Of course, we would like to think of ET as possessing theoretical intelligence and some kind of curiosity, interest not only in other types of minds and societies, but also in contact with these minds and societies. This is a more controversial thing. We've talked about this today already. I'm using a term extelligence here, taken from Jack Cohen and Jan Stewart, a capacity for non-genetic transmission of knowledge, that is imitation and social learning, and its storage independently of individual minds. It is a kind of cultural capital that we have, and we can use the term that David has used today, distributed cognition, to refer to this special capacity. Is language necessary for extelligence? Well, this is controversial too. I don't know, but it seems that it is inevitable to assume that our creature possesses language in order to communicate with us, or at least many think about this. Now, what I have said up to this point can be neatly summarized by Dan Dennett's 4 stages in evolution of minds or intelligence, starting from a very simple creatures that he calls Darwinian creatures, which have hardwired behavior patterns, and then Skinnerian creatures that use trial and error methods in order to respond to environmental pressures and reinforce their responses. Then Popperian creatures that have the special ability to innerly represent the specific features of the environment, and thus preview future acts as candidate acts. And this is a kind of better than chance reaction to the environment. And then we like to think of Gregorian or human-like kind of creatures that also possess these representational powers, but can externalize their inner environments, or in other words, possess extelligence or distributed condition. So there is the problem that can be formulated in this way. Is evolution of Gregorian minds a universal phenomenon, appropriate conditions, of course, being met, or is it a kind of cosmological parochial, as Cohen and Stewart put it, that is a one-time event? What are the chances for human, or at least a mammal type of mind, to reoccur, to evolve independently on several occasions and in several places? And how do we apply this recurrence test at all? These are issues that are unresolved in debate about interstellar message composition. What about evolution of intelligence? This is another example of the universality problem. We like to think that something like intelligence or distributed cognition is a necessary condition for technological development. I think that this is not so obvious, because it might happen. We could think about creatures that are individual and are so intelligent that they do not need any kind of external intelligence to achieve their goals. So what about Etty's inner life and what we might call authentic mental properties? Well, can Gregorian minds like us be instantiated by robots or zombies? Or are Gregorians necessarily sentient experiential creatures? A popular view in contemporary philosophy of mind is yes, they are necessarily sentient experiential creatures. It doesn't make sense to talk about minds if these minds do not possess at least some primitive consciousness. So no mind without some kind of consciousness, or as it is technically termed in philosophy of mind, phenomenal consciousness. There is a philosophical problem of phenomenal properties. Even if evolution of Gregorian minds were universal, does it necessarily lead to emergence of phenomenal properties? Well, this is totally unclear. It might happen that we are the only conscious creatures in the universe. It may be the case that only in the course of human evolution it happened that a creature has emerged that also beyond, in addition to his phenotypic plasticity, it also has these phenomenal properties, instantiates also these phenomenal properties. We typically think that phenomenal properties are necessary for development of social skills. Social skills, not necessarily social life, because we know that there are social instincts that are very efficient in doing whatever they are doing, and this is not necessary in their case, but in case of advanced creature, a creature that can do things that we can do, in such cases in case of such a creature, we would say that phenomenal properties are necessary for social skills. One of the crucial properties is empathy. This is my working definition of empathy: capacity to solve the subjective problem of other minds, simply to know what similar creatures are doing, mind reading or direct knowledge of other minds. And this leads to in-group altruism, coordinated action, and joint agency, of which we had heard today from David. What are the consequences for our project then? Well, if you want to signal, it seems we have to take certain psychological or sociological properties of Etty for granted, and minimally phenomenal type of mind equipped with representational, motivational, or empathic powers for controlling behavior. So this formula, empathy, intelligence, and perhaps extelligence, is what almost all of us assumes as properties of other minds in case of extraterrestrial minds. What are human communicative acts? This is an important issue for thinking about other minds. Well, they're instruments of fulfilling communicative intentions to let other creatures know, other minds know about some information of the environment, from the environment, about the environment, or anything else. Communicants' successful recognition of a communicative intention helps her to retrieve the information from the message. That is, to fulfill the communicator's informative or referential intention. This is taken from a very famous article written in 1957 by Paul Grice, meaning. Well, is a common prearranged code necessary for communication? No. The answer is no, because we can imagine beings who are capable of having intentional states like beliefs, desires, and intentions, but who do not have language. This is something that many philosophers have written about, among them John Searle, from whom I've taken this quote. How do we achieve this? We achieve this by leaning heavily on context in communication. We've heard about this today already. So even if encoded communication messages cannot be recovered without the support of manifold auxiliary hypotheses, with the help of something that we also call common sense or common knowledge. In non-coded communication, the role of context is even more important. It becomes essential. So what are communicative acts of non-human creatures? Typically, we have two answers. One is expression of affective states. The other is that they are referential or informational acts. Paradigm cases are primate vocalizations and honeybee dance. So in case of honeybee dance language, for instance, we have an interesting thing that they are highly specialized and context-dependent communicative acts, and in this case very different from human language. We have discussed this question already yesterday. This is a very nice quote from Mark Hauser's Evolution of Communication. He's claiming that whereas bees are informational laser beams, humans seem to be informational floodlights. So my idea is that in cases of interspecies communication, both laser beam and floodlight strategy might prove futile. Why? If ETI had highly specialized domain-specific informational needs due to its specific survival and communication strategy, we would probably hardly be able to anticipate these needs in order to appropriately fine-tune the content of our message. On the other hand, if we opt for this other communicative strategy, that we communicate highly general knowledge, leaning on so-called universal concepts, we might also, we would have good chances to fail due to the fact that the other being does not possess any kind of general knowledge that we think about. I will skip this slide and just go to my proposal. So, in line with this skeptical attitude about knowing other minds, I would propose that our communicative act should be without any explicit informational or representational or referential content. So our signal should simply reveal our communicative intent without any specific informative intent. That is, without our intending our communicant to share with us any other piece of knowledge apart from the knowledge deducible from the communicative acts as such and the condition in which this act is performed. So it would assume some minimal common context. And what are the potential advantages of my proposal? So I think that the possibility of misunderstanding would thus be reduced, misunderstanding of informational content, because there would be virtually none informational content. And why do I think this would be so? Because we heard both today and yesterday about all possible decoding problems, including the possible incongruency or inconsumability between our minds and alien minds. There are famous Rasherian objections mentioned in the literature. And the other potential advantage is the minimized risk that our signal be mistaken for a deceptive or a hostile act, which can be aptly summarized by the sentence "least said, soonest mended." And perhaps increased chance of response would also be a potential advantage of this kind of proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Your proposal appears to be accepted.
Some people have said we should send lists of primes or things like that. Is that what you have in mind? It doesn't have much information. It just simply calls attention to the fact that it's an artificial signal.
Honestly, I haven't thought about it, about a list of primes to be a kind of, it could be a signal of intention, of an intentional being on the other side of the channel. It might work. Or a simple, how do you call it, Bing, could also be used as such a signal barren of any informational or referential content, potentially being misunderstood or even taken for a hostile act.
Well, I'm all in favor of pings. I think that's what they might send us. But on the other hand, you say that it avoids the problem of, conveying the wrong message. On the other hand, I'm thinking of the sirens, and the Argonauts. There wasn't much information what they were saying. It was just a lure. It was like a bright light on, like the anglerfish or whatever. That they might read it as a possibly hostile signal, even if it's just a ping.
Yeah, I agree. Although, the sirens and on the one side and the Greeks on the other, they were same kinds of creatures, and I think, minded creatures with similar minds, however different Homer may conceive of sirens.
Any further questions, comments? All right, let's thank our speaker again.